The snow fell thick and heavy that Christmas Eve of 1883 in Fort Laramie, Wyoming. And Daphne Kincaid stood at the window of her father's grand house, watching the cowboys ride into town with barely enough coin in their pockets to buy a hot meal. Her father, Harrison Kincaid, owned half the cattle in the territory and every business on Main Street. And tonight, he was hosting the biggest Christmas party Fort Laramie had ever seen. Daphne was 20 years old and dressed in emerald silk that cost more than most families made in a year, but her heart felt as cold as the December wind howling outside. "Stop staring at those filthy drifters," her mother, Patricia, said sharply from behind her. "Come greet our guests. Thomas Whitmore just arrived, and he has been asking for you." Thomas Whitmore was the banker's son from Cheyenne, 30 years old with slicked hair and a calculating smile that never reached his eyes. He had money, breeding, and her father's approval. He also had wandering hands and a cruel streak he tried to hide behind expensive cologne and practiced charm. "I will be there in a moment, Mother," Daphne said quietly, her breath fogging the cold glass as she watched a particular rider dismount outside the general store. He was tall and lean, moving with an easy grace despite the obvious weariness in his shoulders. His clothes were patched and worn, his hat battered by years of sun and rain. When he turned, she saw a young face, weathered but kind, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. He could not have been much older than she was. "That is Franklin Garrett," her father said, appearing at her elbow with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "He works the Morrison Ranch, barely makes enough to feed himself. His father died last spring, left him with nothing but debt." He said it with contempt, as if poverty were a personal failing rather than circumstance. "He looks honest," Daphne said softly. Her father laughed, harsh and loud. "Honest and poor. What good is honesty when you cannot put food on the table? You would do well to forget whatever romantic notions you have about struggling cowboys, daughter. Life is hard enough without choosing to make it harder." But Daphne could not forget. She watched Franklin Garrett through dinner as he tied his horse and walked into the general store, emerging minutes later with only a small sack of supplies that could not have cost more than a few coins. He paused on the wooden sidewalk, looking up at the snow, and even from this distance she could see something in his expression that caught at her heart. Loneliness, maybe, or resignation, or perhaps just the bone-deep tiredness of a man who worked himself raw and had nothing to show for it. The party swirled around her with music and laughter, rich families celebrating another prosperous year. Thomas Whitmore cornered her by the punch bowl, standing too close, his breath reeking of brandy. "Your father and I have been talking," he said, his fingers finding her wrist. "We think an announcement at New Year would be appropriate." "An announcement about what?" Daphne asked, though she knew. Her stomach turned. "Our engagement, naturally. You have kept me waiting long enough, Daphne. You are 20 years old, hardly a girl anymore. Time to settle down with a man who can provide for you properly." "I have not agreed to marry you, Thomas." His grip tightened just enough to hurt. "Your father has agreed, and that is what matters. You are a smart girl. You know which side your bread is buttered on." She pulled away, her heart pounding. "Excuse me. I need some air." "Do not wander far," he called after her, and there was something dark in his tone that made her skin crawl. "I will come find you." Daphne grabbed her heavy cloak and slipped out the back door into the snow-filled night. The cold hit her like a slap, but she welcomed it, needing the clarity it brought. Her breath came in quick white clouds as she walked away from the house, away from the noise and the expectations and the future that had been planned for her without her consent. She found herself on Main Street, her fine silk dress dragging through the snow beneath her cloak. The storefronts were mostly dark, but warm light glowed from the saloon windows where cowboys and ranch hands celebrated the holiday in their own way. She heard laughter and the tinny sound of an off-key piano. "You should not be out here alone, miss." The voice startled her, and she spun around. Franklin Garrett stood a few feet away, his arms full of firewood, his breath misting in the freezing air. Up close, she could see that his eyes were blue, the color of summer sky startling against his sun-bronzed skin. There was concern in his face, genuine and unguarded. "I needed air," she said. "The house was too warm." He glanced at her expensive cloak, her fine leather boots already soaked through with snow. "You are Harrison Kincaid's daughter." "Does that matter?" A small smile tugged at his lips. "I suppose not, but it matters that you are out here in a blizzard wearing dancing shoes." "Come on, the church is just here. Father McCarthy always leaves it open on Christmas Eve." He walked toward the small wooden church at the end of the street, and after a moment's hesitation, Daphne followed. The church was indeed unlocked, and inside it was blessedly warm. Someone had lit candles along the altar, and their soft glow filled the space with golden light. Franklin set down his firewood by the stove and began feeding logs into the fire. "I was bringing this for the midnight service," he explained. "Father McCarthy is getting old, has trouble carrying wood these days." "That is kind of you," Daphne said, moving closer to the growing warmth. "Especially when you have so little to spare." He glanced at her sharply. "Who said I have little to spare? Everyone knows everything in Fort Laramie." "I am sorry about your father." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Thank you. He was a good man. Just had bad luck with a drought and worse luck with his health. It must be hard working the Morrison Ranch alone." "I am not alone. There are 6 other hands there. And I do not work for Morrison anymore, actually. I saved enough to buy a small piece of land north of here. Nothing fancy, just 40 acres and a cabin that needs work, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, quiet but unmistakable. "That is wonderful," Daphne said, and meant it. "What will you do with it?" "Raise horses, if I can get a breeding pair. Maybe some cattle eventually. It will take years to build up, but at least I will be working for myself." He closed the stove door and turned to look at her properly for the first time. "You really should get back to your party. People will be looking for you." "Let them look," she said, more fiercely than she intended. "I am so tired of being told what to do, who to marry, how to live my life. My father has decided I should marry Thomas Whitmore, and nobody has asked what I want." Franklin's expression hardened. "I know Whitmore. He comes into town sometimes, treats the working folks like dirt beneath his boots. You should not have to marry a man like that. Tell that to my father. I am nobody. Your father would not listen to me. Hell, he would probably have me run out of town just for speaking to you." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Daphne studied Franklin in the candlelight, taking in the patches on his shirt, the worn leather of his belt, the calluses on his hands. By every measure her parents valued, he was the wrong choice. Poor, uneducated beyond basic reading and writing, without prospects or connections. But he had kind eyes, and he had stopped to help an old priest carry firewood on Christmas Eve when he could barely afford to feed himself. And he spoke to her like she was a person, not a prize to be won or a business transaction to be negotiated. "You believe in love?" she asked suddenly. The question clearly caught him off guard. "I believe in loyalty and respect and working together toward something good. I suppose that is love in a way. Not romance, not passion. Those things burn hot and fast like kindling. What I am talking about is the slow, steady heat of oak logs that keep you warm all winter long." He shook his head, looking embarrassed. "Listen to me talking like I know anything about it. I have never even courted a girl properly." "Why not?" Because I have nothing to offer. What girl wants to tie herself to a man with 40 acres of raw land and a leaking roof? I need to build something first, prove I can provide. Maybe some girls do not need a man to provide for them, Daphne said softly. Maybe some girls need a man to stand beside them as an equal. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them, electric and undeniable. The church door banged open and they both jumped. Thomas Whitmore stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "There you are," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Your mother is beside herself with worry, and here I find you, alone with hired help in a dark church. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "We were just talking," Daphne said, drawing herself up straight. "Franklin was kind enough to help me get out of the cold." "I bet he was." Thomas's lip curled. "Get away from her, Cowboy. This does not concern you." Franklin did not move. "The lady can make her own choices about who she talks to. The lady is my intended, and you will show some respect." Thomas moved closer, and Daphne could see the rage building behind his eyes. She had seen him like this once before, when a shop clerk had given him incorrect change. He had beaten the boy bloody while people looked away. "I am not your intended," Daphne said clearly. "I have never agreed to marry you, Thomas. I will not agree. You need to leave. Do not be childish. Your father and I have an understanding. Then you and my father can get married. I want nothing to do with it." Thomas grabbed her arm, hard enough to bruise. "You ungrateful little witch. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position?" Franklin moved fast, stepping between them and breaking Thomas's grip in one smooth motion. "She asked you to leave. I suggest you do it." "You are making a very big mistake," Thomas said, his voice shaking with fury. "Do you know who I am, who her father is? One word from me, and you will never work in this territory again. I work for myself now, and I do not take orders from bullies who rough up women." Thomas lunged forward, swinging wildly. Franklin sidestepped easily, years of working with unpredictable livestock making him quick and balanced. The punch that was meant for Franklin's jaw caught only air, and Thomas stumbled forward into the pews. "Go home, Whitmore," Franklin said quietly. "Sleep it off. This does not have to get uglier than it already is." Thomas picked himself up, breathing hard, his eyes moving between Daphne and Franklin with pure venom. "You will both regret this," he said. "I promise you that." He stormed out, leaving the church door swinging in the wind. Franklin closed it carefully, then turned to Daphne. "Are you all right?" She was shaking, but not from fear. From the realization that she had just burned every bridge to her old life in the space of 5 minutes. "I cannot go home," she said. "My father will be furious. He will force me to apologize to Thomas, force me to go through with the marriage." "Then do not go home," she stared at him. "What?" Franklin ran a hand through his hair, looking almost as shocked as she felt. "I am sorry, that was forward of me. I just meant that you have choices. You could stay with the sisters at the mission, or there are good families in town who would take you in. And then what? Eventually my father would come for me, or the money would run out, or I would be trapped anyway." Daphne took a deep breath, her heart hammering. "Unless I made a different choice entirely." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I am 20 years old enough to make my own decisions. I am saying that you are the first person in my entire life who has treated me like I matter for more than my father's money or connections. I am saying that I would rather spend my life with an honest poor man than a cruel rich one." "You do not know me," Franklin said, but his voice was hoarse. "We met 20 minutes ago. I know you bring firewood to old priests on Christmas Eve. I know you stood up to a bully even though it could cost you everything. I know that when you look at me, you see me, not just a pretty face attached to a fortune." She moved closer to him. If I asked you to marry me right now, tonight, what would you say? I would say you are crazy, he said, but he was not backing away. I would say you would be giving up a life of comfort for hardship and uncertainty. I would say that my cabin has one room and leaks when it rains and the stove smokes unless you know exactly how to work it. That was not a no. Daphne. He said her name like a prayer. I have nothing, less than nothing. The land is mine, but I still owe the bank for supplies. I do not even have a breeding pair of horses yet. It would be years before I could give you any kind of decent life. Then we will build it together. You do not know what you are asking. The work is brutal. The winters are worse. You would be hungry and cold and exhausted most of the time. Better hungry and free than well-fed and trapped. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. I am not foolish enough to think this would be easy, but I am wise enough to know that easy and good are not the same thing. I am asking you, Franklin Garrett, will you marry me? He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek, closing his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I will marry you. God help us both. Father McCarthy, as it turned out, had been listening from the vestry, and he came out shaking his head and smiling. I have been a priest for 40 years, he said, and I have never seen anything quite like this. Are you absolutely certain, Miss Kincaid? Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, especially under these circumstances. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, Daphne said. And you, Franklin, you understand what you are taking on. Her father will not take this well. I know, Father, but I gave her my word and I do not break my word. Father McCarthy sighed. Then I suppose I should fetch my book. Though I warn you both, half the town is going to think you have lost your minds. Only half, Franklin said, and despite everything, Daphne laughed. They were married 15 minutes later, standing in front of the candle-lit altar with snow whipping against the windows. Daphne still wore her emerald silk dress, and Franklin wore his patched-work clothes. Father McCarthy spoke the words that had joined countless couples before them, and when Franklin kissed her, it was gentle and tentative and filled with promise. "What now?" she asked when they pulled apart. "Now we face the consequences," Franklin said. "Your father deserves to hear this from you, not from gossip. And you should pack whatever you want to bring with you, because once we tell him, I doubt he will let you back in the house." The walk back to the Kincaid mansion felt both too long and too short. Daphne's hand was tucked into the crook of Franklin's arm, and she drew strength from his solid presence beside her. The party was still going strong when they arrived, music and laughter spilling out into the night. "Maybe we should wait until morning," Franklin suggested, looking up at the imposing 3-story house with its elaborate gingerbread trim and glowing windows. "Waiting will not make it easier." They went around to the front door this time, and Daphne walked in like she owned the place, which technically she supposed she did not anymore. The guests turned to stare at her snow-covered hem and wind-tangled hair. Her mother gasped from across the room. "Daphne Louise Kincaid, where have you been? Thomas said you ran off with some vagrant, but I told him he must be mistaken." "He was not mistaken," Daphne said clearly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Though Franklin is not a vagrant. He is a landowner and a horseman, and as of 10 minutes ago he is my husband." The silence that followed was absolute. Her mother swayed on her feet. Her father, standing by the fireplace with a cigar in his hand, went absolutely white, then red, then purple. "You did what?" he whispered. "I married Franklin Garrett. We were wed by Father McCarthy in the church, properly and legally." Harrison Kincaid moved across the room like a thunderstorm, his rage palpable. "You stupid, stupid girl. You have ruined yourself, thrown away everything I built for you for a nobody with nothing." "He is not a nobody," Daphne said, though her voice shook slightly. "And I did not throw anything away. I chose my own future. You chose poverty and misery." Her father's hand rose, and for a terrible moment, Daphne thought he might actually strike her. But Franklin stepped forward, placing himself between them. "Sir, I understand you are angry. You have every right to be. This was sudden and probably seems reckless, but I give you my word that I will take care of your daughter. I will work myself to the bone to make sure she never regrets this decision." "Your word?" Harrison laughed bitterly. "What is the word of a penniless cowboy worth? You have stolen my daughter, probably thinking you could get your hands on my money through her." "I do not want your money," Franklin said quietly. "I want to earn my own way." "Then you are a fool as well as a thief. Get out of my house, both of you. If my daughter wants to play at being poor, let her see what it really means. You will get nothing from me, Daphne. Not a penny, not a piece of furniture, not a single dress from your wardrobe. Let your cowboy provide for you, since you think so little of all I have given you." Patricia Kincaid was crying, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Harrison, please. She is our only child. She was our only child. Now she is Franklin Garrett's problem." He turned his back on them. "I want you out of this house in 5 minutes. If you are not gone, I will have the sheriff remove you." Daphne felt tears stinging her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had known this would be his reaction, had prepared herself for it. But hearing the words was different from imagining them. "May I at least get some clothes? You can take the dress you are wearing. Everything else belongs to me, bought with my money." "I will buy my own clothes," Daphne said, lifting her chin. "Come on, Franklin. We are not wanted here." They walked out together into the Christmas Eve snow, and this time when the door closed behind them, Daphne knew it would not open again. Franklin's horse was still tied outside, a patient buckskin gelding with kind eyes. "I am sorry," Franklin said, helping her up into the saddle. "I did not think he would be that harsh." "I did," Daphne said. "My father does not tolerate defiance. I knew what I was choosing." Franklin swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. The horse started forward at a gentle walk, carrying them away from the only home Daphne had ever known. The snow was falling harder now, thick white flakes that clung to her hair and lashes. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My cabin. Our cabin, I suppose I should say now. It is about 5 miles north of town. We should make it before the worst of the storm hits." They rode in silence through the winter night, leaving the lights of Fort Laramie behind. Daphne had never been on a horse before, not like this, and she found herself leaning back against Franklin's chest, trusting him to guide them safely. His body was warm and solid behind her, and despite everything that had just happened, she felt oddly peaceful. "What are you thinking?" he asked after a while. "That I am cold and scared and exhilarated all at the same time. That I have burned every bridge behind me and have no idea what comes next. That I married a stranger on Christmas Eve, and it is either the best or worst decision I have ever made." "For what it is worth, I think it is the best," he said quietly. "But I am probably biased." She smiled despite herself. "Probably." The cabin appeared out of the snow like something from a dream, small and dark and listing slightly to one side. Franklin dismounted and helped Daphne down, then led his horse to a small lean-to shelter beside the cabin. "Let me get him settled, then I will get a fire going," he said. "Go on inside. The door sticks, so you have to lift and push at the same time." The cabin was even smaller inside than it had looked from outside. Just one room with an iron stove, a narrow bed, a rough table with 2 chairs, and some shelves on the wall. It was freezing cold and smelled of wood smoke and leather. Daphne's silk dress, already soaked from the snow, clung to her legs like ice. Franklin came in a few minutes later, his arms full of firewood. He went straight to the stove and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. "I know it is not much," he said, not looking at her. "I told you it would be rough." "It is fine," Daphne said, though her teeth were chattering. "It just needs some work." He glanced at her, really looked at her, and swore softly. "You are freezing. That dress is soaked through." "I have some spare clothes in the chest there. They will be too big, but at least they are dry." He rummaged in an old trunk and pulled out a flannel shirt and some woolen pants. "Turn around," Daphne said. "Oh, right, of course." He turned his back, and she quickly stripped out of the wet silk dress, her frozen fingers fumbling with the tiny buttons. The dry clothes were enormous on her, but they were warm and soft from wear. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs as best she could. "All right," she said, and Franklin turned back around. His eyes widened slightly, then he smiled. "You look like a girl playing dress-up in her father's clothes. These are your clothes, so I suppose that is exactly what I am doing, except you are my husband, not my father." The word felt strange on her tongue. Husband. "We should probably talk about that," Franklin said, feeding another log into the stove. The fire was catching now, warmth beginning to fill the small space. "About expectations. I do not expect anything from you, Daphne. Just because we are married does not mean I am going to force myself on you. You can have the bed, I will sleep on the floor." "That is ridiculous. It is your bed in your cabin." "Our cabin now, and I am serious. We did this backward, getting married before we even courted." "I am not going to make it worse by being presumptuous." Daphne moved closer to the stove, holding her hands out to the growing heat. "You are a good man, Franklin Garrett. My father was wrong about you. Time will tell. Right now, I am a man with a wife I cannot properly feed or clothe or shelter. That does not feel very good. Then we will figure it out together." They sat at the small table and shared what little food Franklin had, some dried beef and hardtack that Daphne had to soak in water to chew. It was the worst meal she had ever eaten, and somehow the best, because she had chosen it freely. Because Franklin cut his portion in half and gave her the larger piece, even though he was clearly hungry. Because this was real in a way her life had never been before. "Tell me about your horses," she said. "Your dream for this place." His face lit up in a way that made him look younger. "I want to breed quarter horses, the kind that can work cattle all day and still have heart left over. There is a rancher up in Montana who has the best bloodlines in the territory, but his stud fees are more than I can afford right now. I figured I would start smaller, maybe get a couple of Mustang mares from the wild herds and a decent stallion, build up slowly." "How much do you need for the Montana horse?" $50, which I do not have. Daphne thought about the jewelry she had left behind, the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her, the gold locket that had been her 18th birthday present. They would have been worth 10 times that amount. "We will find a way," she said. "You keep saying we. You have been poor for all of 2 hours, Daphne. You do not know what you are signing up for. Then teach me." "What do I need to learn?" He blinked at her, surprised. "Everything, probably." "Can you cook?" "No, our cook always handled that. Clean, sew, garden, tend livestock. No, 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 and no." "Well," he rubbed the back of his neck, "this is going to be interesting." Despite everything, Daphne laughed. "I am a quick learner. And I am not afraid of hard work, even though I have never done it before. You will just have to be patient with me. I can do that." His expression softened. "You really meant what you said, did not you, about choosing this life?" "I really meant it." They talked late into the night, huddled close to the stove while the wind howled outside and snow piled against the walls. Franklin told her about growing up on his father's failing ranch, about watching helplessly as disease took their cattle and drought killed their crops, about his father's slow decline and death. and the mountain of debt that had buried any inheritance. Daphne told him about growing up in a gilded cage, about the endless lessons in deportment and dancing and needlework that were supposed to make her a proper wife for a rich man, about the loneliness of being an only child with parents who saw her as an investment rather than a daughter. "I have never had a friend," she admitted. "Not a real one. The girls I knew were always competing, always looking for ways to get ahead. And the boys were only interested in my father's money. Until tonight, I had never had a conversation that felt real." "It has been just the opposite for me," Franklin said. "Too many friends and not enough money to go around." The hands at Morrison's ranch, they were good men, but watching them struggle year after year, barely making enough to survive. That is part of why I saved every penny to buy my own land. At least this way, if I fail, I only take myself down with me." He paused. "Or I did until tonight." "We are not going to fail," Daphne said with more confidence than she felt. Finally, exhaustion caught up with them both. Franklin laid out blankets on the floor near the stove, and Daphne took the bed as he had insisted. It was narrow and the mattress was lumpy, but she was so tired that she did not care. She lay in the darkness listening to Franklin's breathing slow and deepen, and thought about everything that had changed in a single evening. This morning she had been Daphne Kincaid, rich man's daughter, trapped in a life she did not want. Now she was Daphne Garrett, married to a man she barely knew, owner of nothing but the borrowed clothes on her back. By any reasonable measure, she should be terrified. Instead, she felt hope. She woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee. Franklin was already up, dressed and moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. The stove was lit and warming, and he was frying something in a pan. "Good morning," he said when he saw her stirring. "I hope you like eggs. A neighbor keeps chickens and she trades me eggs for firewood sometimes. I figure Christmas breakfast should be something special." Daphne sat up, pushing her tangled hair out of her face. Her entire body ached from the unfamiliar bed, and she was still cold despite sleeping near the stove. "That sounds wonderful." They ate in companionable silence, and then Franklin said, "We should go into town today. You need proper clothes and boots." "I have a little money saved, enough to get you outfitted with basics. I do not want you spending your savings on me." "Well, I cannot have my wife walking around in my oversized pants. People will talk," he smiled. "Besides, you are going to need work clothes if you are serious about learning to help around here." The ride into Fort Laramie was cold but beautiful, everything covered in fresh snow that sparkled in the sunlight. Daphne rode in front of Franklin again, and this time she allowed herself to enjoy the closeness, the way his arms felt around her, strong and sure. Town was quiet on Christmas morning, most families inside their homes celebrating the holiday. But the general store was open, run by a weathered woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who took one look at Daphne's borrowed clothes and raised her eyebrows. "Heard about your wedding," she said to Franklin. "Whole town is buzzing about it. That took some courage, going up against Harrison Kincaid." "Or stupidity," Franklin said. "Time will tell which." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. "For what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. I have known Thomas Whitmore since he was a boy, and he has got a mean streak a mile wide. No woman should be forced to marry a man like that." She turned to Daphne. "Let me get you some things, honey. You need work dresses, good boots, undergarments, a proper coat. Cannot have you freezing to death your first week of marriage." An hour later, Daphne was outfitted in sturdy calico dresses, woolen stockings, leather boots that were scuffed but serviceable, and a heavy coat lined with sheepskin. Franklin counted out coins with careful precision, and Daphne could see him mentally calculating what was left. "You need anything else while we are here?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "Supplies running low. I could use some coffee and flour if you have it," Franklin said. "And maybe some sugar." "Take what you need. Pay me when you can. I know you are good for it." "I pay my debts, Mrs. Fletcher. I am not looking for charity." "It is not charity, it is neighborliness. There is a difference." She wrapped up the supplies and handed them over. "You two take care of each other. And Daphne, if you need anything, anything at all, you come see me. Do not be too proud to ask for help." They were loading the supplies onto the horse when a familiar voice called out, "Well, if it is not the happy couple." Thomas Whitmore stood across the street, looking worse for wear after last night. His eyes were bloodshot and his clothes were rumpled, but the anger was still there, simmering under the surface. "Leave us alone, Thomas," Daphne said. "I just want to talk. That is allowed, is not it? Even for us rich folk who apparently are not good enough for the high and mighty Daphne Kincaid." He walked closer, and Daphne could smell the whiskey on him. "Your father is beside himself. He is talking about having the marriage annulled, claiming you were coerced." "I was not coerced. I married Franklin of my own free will. That is not how your father sees it. He thinks this cowboy took advantage of you, got you alone and confused, and convinced you to do something stupid." Thomas's eyes moved to Franklin. "It would be in your best interest to walk away now. Get the marriage annulled, give her back to her family, and maybe Harrison will not destroy you completely." "The only person I am interested in is standing right next to me," Franklin said calmly, "and she already made her choice. You think you won something, do not you? Got yourself a rich wife, figured you hit the jackpot, except she is not rich anymore. Harrison cut her off completely. She is as poor as you are now, Cowboy, so what did you really win?" "A partner," Franklin said. "Someone to build a life with. That is worth more than all your father's money." Thomas laughed, harsh and ugly. "You are dumber than I thought. Give it a month. When she is freezing and hungry and sick of living in that shack you call a cabin, she will come crawling back, and I will be waiting." "Keep waiting," Daphne said. "You will be disappointed." They rode away, leaving Thomas standing in the snow. Franklin was quiet, his jaw tight, and Daphne knew he was thinking about what had been said. "He was trying to get under your skin," she said. "Do not let him." "He was right, though, was not he? You are as poor as I am now. I took you from a life of comfort and gave you nothing in return. You gave me freedom. That is not nothing. Freedom does not keep you warm at night. Freedom does not fill your belly when you are hungry. No, but love does those things, or at least it helps you bear the hardship." She felt Franklin stiffen behind her. "I know it is too soon to talk about love. We barely know each other, but I feel something for you, Franklin, something real, and I think you feel it too." "I do," he said quietly. "I felt it the moment I saw you standing in that church, looking lost and brave and beautiful all at once. But feeling something and making a life together are two different things. Then we will do both. Feel and build and grow together." The days after Christmas fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Daphne learned to cook over the temperamental stove, burning more meals than she succeeded at first, but slowly improving. Franklin taught her to tend the horse, to chop kindling, to mend fences and patch the leaking roof. Her hands, soft from a lifetime of leisure, blistered and bled until they finally began to toughen. It was the hardest physical work she had ever done, and she had never felt more alive. Franklin was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid when she failed, always praising her small successes. And in the evenings when the work was done and they sat by the stove sharing their simple dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. About dreams and fears and hopes for the future. They learned each other slowly, carefully. The way Franklin rubbed the back of his neck when he was thinking. The way Daphne hummed tunelessly when she was concentrating on a task. his terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh. Her stubborn refusal to quit even when something seemed impossible. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It started with small touches, accidental at first. Hands brushing when passing tools, shoulders bumping while working side by side, then more deliberate. Franklin taking her work roughened hands and rubbing salve into the cuts and blisters. Daphne standing behind him to adjust his collar before they rode into town. 3 weeks into their marriage, Franklin kissed her properly for the first time. They had been working on reinforcing the chicken coop he was building, and Daphne had finally gotten a stubborn nail to go in straight after a dozen failed attempts. She had turned to him with such triumph on her face that he had laughed, and then suddenly they were kissing, his hand cupping her cheek, her fingers curling into his shirt. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Franklin said, "I have been wanting to do that since Christmas Eve." "What took you so long?" "I wanted to make sure it was right, that you were choosing me, not just running away from your father." "I am choosing you," Daphne said, and kissed him again to prove it. That night, Franklin did not sleep on the floor. They lay together in the narrow bed, learning the shape and feel of each other, and when he made love to her, it was gentle and awkward and perfect. Afterward, Daphne lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. "I love you," she said into the darkness. "I love you too," Franklin said, his arms tightening around her. "God help me. I think I loved you from the moment you asked me to marry you. Craziest thing anyone ever did, and you did it for me." January turned into February, and the Wyoming winter showed no mercy. There were days when the wind blew so cold that they could not work outside at all, days when they huddled by the stove and made the firewood last as long as possible. Money was tight, tighter than Daphne had imagined possible. Every penny had to be carefully considered and stretched, but there were also moments of surprising joy. The first egg from their new chickens, the deer Franklin shot that provided meat for 2 weeks, the evening Mrs. Fletcher rode out with a basket of supplies and news from town, refusing payment and saying only that neighbors looked out for neighbors. "Your father has been asking about you," she said carefully. "Wants to know if you are all right." "What did you tell him?" Daphne asked. "Told him you looked happy. That seemed to make him angrier than if I had said you were miserable." Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. "Some people cannot stand to be proven wrong." "He will never forgive me," Daphne said after Mrs. Fletcher had gone. "Give him time," Franklin said. "He is your father. Eventually he will come around." But Harrison Kincaid did not come around. In March, when Franklin went to the bank to make a payment on his land, he was told that his loan had been called in. Full payment was due in 30 days, or the bank would foreclose. Franklin came home white-faced and silent. When Daphne asked what was wrong, he told her. "How much do we owe?" she asked. $80. "I have 15 saved. I was supposed to have 3 more years to pay it off, but someone convinced the bank to call it in early." He did not have to say who that someone was. "My father," Daphne said, "probably, or Thomas Whitmore. Does it matter? The result is the same. We are going to lose everything." "No," Daphne stood up, her mind racing. "We are not. There has to be a way." "There is not, Daphne. I cannot make $65 in a month. Not legally anyway. Then we will sell something." "We do not have anything to sell. The horse is worth maybe $20 if we are lucky, and we need him to work. The chickens are not worth much. The cabin is falling apart. There is nothing." But Daphne was already moving, pulling on her coat. "Where are you going?" Franklin asked. "To town. To sell the one thing I do have of value." She rode through the March mud, the spring thaw making the roads treacherous. In Fort Laramie, she went straight to the telegraph office and sent a wire to Cheyenne, to an aunt she had not spoken to in years. Her mother's sister, who had married for love rather than money and had been quietly supporting Daphne from a distance. The reply came 2 days later. Her aunt would loan them the money, no questions asked, to be paid back whenever they could manage it. The wire transfer would arrive within the week. When Daphne told Franklin, he was quiet for a long time. "I do not like being in debt," he finally said. "It is a loan from family, not charity from strangers, and we will pay it back, every penny. It will take years. Then we will take years. I am not going anywhere." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I am supposed to be taking care of you. Instead, you are saving me." "We are saving each other," Daphne said. "That is what partners do." They made the payment with 2 days to spare, and Franklin shook the banker's hand with quiet dignity, even though they both knew the man had tried to ruin them on Harrison Kincaid's orders. Walking out of the bank, still owning their land, felt like the greatest victory of Daphne's life. Spring came in earnest, bringing warmer weather and longer days. Franklin plowed a garden plot and Daphne planted vegetables, following instructions from a farmer's almanac they borrowed from Mrs. Fletcher. The chicken coop was finished, housing 6 laying hens that provided a steady supply of eggs, and in May, Franklin came home leading 2 horses, a mare and a yearling colt, both mustangs he had captured from the wild herd that roamed the territory. "They are not fancy," he said, "but the mare has good bone and the colt has potential. It is a start." Daphne threw her arms around him. "It is perfect." They worked together to gentle the horses, spending hours each day earning their trust. It was slow, patient work, and there were setbacks. But gradually, the mare, who Daphne named Willow, began to respond to handling. The colt, called Storm because of his gray coat and wild temperament, took longer but showed flashes of brilliance that made Franklin's eyes light up. "If I can get him trained properly," he said one evening, watching the colt move in the corral, "he could be something special. Good enough to sell for breeding, maybe." "How long would that take?" 2, maybe 3 years. He needs to mature and prove himself working cattle." "Then we have time," Daphne said. Summer brought its own challenges. The garden struggled in the Wyoming heat, and they spent endless hours hauling water to keep the plants alive. Daphne's face and arms turned brown from the sun, and her body grew lean and strong from the constant physical work. She no longer recognized herself in the cracked mirror that hung on the cabin wall, and she did not miss the girl she used to be. In August, Mrs. Fletcher brought news that made Daphne's heart ache. Her mother was ill, a fever that would not break. Harrison Kincaid had sent word through town that Daphne was welcome to visit if she wished. "You should go," Franklin said immediately. "She is your mother." "What if it is a trap? What if my father tries to keep me there? Then I will come get you." "But Daphne, if something happens and you did not get to say goodbye, you would regret it for the rest of your life." So Daphne rode into town and walked up to the house where she had grown up. The maid who answered the door barely recognized her, this sun-browned woman in a simple calico dress with work-roughened hands. Her mother was in bed, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. Her face lit up when Daphne entered. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I came." Daphne sat beside the bed and took her mother's hand. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. So tired." Patricia's eyes searched her daughter's face. "You look different, older. Are you happy?" "I am," Daphne said honestly. "Happier than I have ever been. Even though you are poor, even though. Especially because I am living my own life, Mother, making my own choices. That is worth more than all of Father's money." Patricia smiled weakly. "I wish I had been that brave when I was your age. I married your father because it was expected, because my family needed the connection. I never asked myself what I wanted. You still have time to ask. You are only 43. Maybe. Patricia's grip tightened on Daphne's hand. Your father is angry, but he misses you. He will never admit it, but he does. Give him time. He might surprise you. They talked until Patricia grew too tired to continue, and then Daphne kissed her mother's forehead and left. Her father was waiting in the hallway, and they stood facing each other in uncomfortable silence. She looks better than she did yesterday, Harrison finally said. The doctor thinks she will recover. I am glad. You look thin. Is that cowboy feeding you properly, Franklin? Daphne said firmly. His name is Franklin, and yes, we are managing fine. Harrison's jaw worked. You could come home, both of you. I would give him a job managing one of my ranches. You would have a proper house, security, a future. Working for you, you mean, under your control. Is that so terrible? I am offering you a way out of poverty. You are offering me a cage with prettier bars. The answer is no, Father. We are building something of our own, and we are not giving that up for comfort. Pride, Harrison said bitterly. You get that from me. Stubborn, stupid pride. I prefer to think of it as integrity, but call it what you like. Daphne moved toward the door. Thank you for letting me visit Mother. If she needs anything, send word. I will come. Daphne. Her father's voice stopped her. I am not going to apologize for trying to call in that loan. I was angry and I wanted to teach you a lesson. Lesson learned, Daphne said. That my father cares more about being right than about his daughter's happiness. That is not fair. Is not it? You tried to force me to marry a man I did not love. When I refused, you cut me off completely and tried to ruin the man I married. What would you call that? Harrison had no answer, and Daphne left him standing in the hallway. The ride back to the cabin felt longer than usual, and Daphne was exhausted by the time she arrived. Franklin met her at the door, pulling her into his arms. How is your mother? She will recover. And my father offered you a job managing one of his ranches. Franklin pulled back to look at her. What did you say? I said no. We are not working for him, Franklin. We are not giving him that power over our lives. You could have asked me first. I did not need to, I know you. You would have taken the job for me, thinking it was what I wanted. But it is not. I want this. She gestured around the small cabin. I want us building something together, making our own way. That is what I choose. Franklin kissed her, deep and long. Have I mentioned that I love you? Not in the last few hours. I love you, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Good, Daphne said, because I plan to keep you around for a very long time. Fall came and went in a blur of harvest and preparation for winter. The garden had produced better than they hoped, and Daphne spent weeks canning vegetables and preserving meat. The cabin, reinforced and patched over the long months, was finally weatherproof. Storm, the gray colt, had gentled considerably and showed real promise working cattle when Franklin borrowed a few head to practice with. In November, Daphne realized she was pregnant. She told Franklin on a cold evening while they were sitting by the stove. He stared at her for a long moment, then whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small cabin. We are going to be parents, he said, wonder in his voice. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy? Daphne asked, though she could see the answer in his face. Happy, I am terrified, but yes, incredibly happy. He set her down carefully like she might break. When? Early summer, I think. June, maybe. We need to prepare. The baby will need clothes and blankets and a cradle. We will need to save money for the doctor. And you should not be working so hard, not in your condition. I am pregnant, not dying. Women have been doing hard work while pregnant since the beginning of time. Not my wife. But Daphne continued to work through the winter, though Franklin hovered and worried constantly. She grew round and uncomfortable, her back aching and her feet swelling. But she had never felt more content. This was her life, the one she had chosen, and she would not trade it for anything. In December, nearly a year after their impulsive Christmas Eve wedding, they received an unexpected visitor. Harrison Kincaid rode up to the cabin on a cold afternoon, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his expensive suit. Franklin met him at the door, his body tense. "Mr. Kincaid." "Garrett, is my daughter here?" "I am here," Daphne said, coming to stand beside her husband. Her pregnancy was obvious now, her belly round beneath her simple dress. Harrison stared at her, his face working through a complicated series of emotions. "You are with child." "I am." "When?" "Summer. June, we think." Her father nodded slowly. He looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, new lines around his eyes. "Your mother sent me. She said if I did not come make peace with you before her grandchild was born, she would leave me." He said it matter-of-factly, but there was something in his expression that was almost vulnerable. She was serious. "Mother always did have more sense than you," Daphne said. A small smile touched Harrison's lips. "That she does. May I come in?" Franklin hesitated, then stepped aside. The cabin must have looked impossibly small and poor to Harrison Kincaid, but he did not comment on it. He removed his hat and stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you, Garrett. I thought you were after my daughter's money. I thought you would fail within a month and she would come crawling back. But you have not failed. You have worked hard and taken care of her, probably better than I did with all my money. With all due respect, sir, it has not been about me taking care of her." "We have been taking care of each other," Harrison nodded. "I can see that. You look happy, Daphne, tired and poor and pregnant, but happy." "I am," Daphne said, "happier than I ever was in your house. That hurts to hear, but I suppose I deserve it." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "Your mother wanted me to give you this. It is from her account, not mine. Money for the baby, for whatever you need." Franklin shook his head. "We do not need your money. It is not from me, it is from Patricia. And you might not need it, but babies are expensive. Doctors and medicines and clothes. Let an old fool of a grandfather help out." Daphne took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. "Thank you. Tell Mother we appreciate it. Tell her yourself. She wants you to come to dinner, both of you. Christmas dinner, if you are willing." Daphne looked at Franklin, who nodded slowly. "We will come," she said. "But Father, no more games. No more trying to control our lives or buy us off. If we come to dinner, it is as equals, as family. Can you accept that?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "I can try," he finally said. "That is the best I can offer. Then we will try too." Christmas dinner at the Kincaid mansion was both awkward and oddly healing. Patricia was overjoyed to see Daphne, fussing over her pregnancy and exclaiming over how well she looked. Harrison was stiff and formal, but he was making an effort, asking Franklin questions about the ranch and actually listening to the answers. "I heard you have been working with wild horses," Harrison said over dessert. "How is that going?" Slowly, Franklin admitted. "But we have a gray colt that shows real potential. If he continues to develop, I think he could be something special." "What do you need to make that happen?" "Time, mostly, and maybe access to some cattle so I can train him properly." "I have cattle. Come spring, you can use my south pasture." "There are some older cows there that need working anyway." Franklin stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are family," Harrison said gruffly. "And because my daughter loves you, which means I need to accept you. Might as well make myself useful in the process." It was not a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. And as they rode home that night, Daphne leaned back against Franklin's chest and thought about how much had changed in a single year. "What are you thinking?" Franklin asked. "That last Christmas Eve, I was alone and trapped and desperate. And now I have you, and a baby coming, and a life that is mine. That is a lot of change for 12 months. Good change, the best change. Spring came early that year, and Franklin spent long days in Harrison's south pasture working storm with cattle. The young horse was proving everything Franklin had hoped, quick and smart and tireless. Word began to spread about the gray colt, and in May, a rancher from Colorado stopped by to watch him work. "I would pay good money for a horse like that," the rancher said, "if you are interested in selling." "Not selling," Franklin said, "but I might be interested in a stud arrangement." The rancher offered $50 for 2 seasons of breeding rights, and Franklin accepted. It was more money than they had seen in the entire year, and it meant they could pay back Daphne's aunt, buy a second breeding mare, and still have some left over. "We are going to make it," Franklin said that night, holding Daphne close. "This is really going to work." Their daughter was born on a hot June afternoon with the doctor and Mrs. Fletcher attending. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect. Franklin cried when he held her, and Daphne thought her heart might burst from how much love she felt for her small family. They named her Rose after Franklin's mother, and she was a happy baby who rarely cried. Harrison and Patricia visited regularly, and slowly, painfully, the rift between Daphne and her father began to heal. He would never be perfect, would never fully understand why she had chosen the life she did. But he loved his granddaughter fiercely, and that gave them common ground. The years passed in a blur of work and growth and love. Storm proved himself again and again, siring colts that were sought after across the territory. Franklin bought more land, built a proper barn, expanded their horse herd. Daphne managed the accounts and the garden and their growing family, her sharp mind proving invaluable as they built their business. They had 3 more children over the next 6 years. A son they named James, then twin girls Clara and June. The cabin was expanded twice, growing from 1 room to 4 with a proper kitchen and a sleeping loft for the children. Money was never abundant, but it was steady. They lived simply, saving what they could, reinvesting in the ranch. Franklin's reputation as a horseman grew, and people came from as far as Montana to buy his quarter horses. Daphne's garden produced enough to feed their family and sell the surplus in town. On their 10th anniversary, Franklin took Daphne into Fort Laramie and bought her a gold ring to replace the simple band she had worn since their wedding. It was not fancy, just a thin circle of gold, but it meant everything because it represented what they had built together. "I am sorry I could not give you this at the start," he said as he slipped it on her finger, "but maybe it means more this way." "It means everything this way," Daphne said, kissing him, "because we earned it together." They stood on the sidewalk outside the jewelry store, older now and marked by years of hard work and sun and wind. But they were happy, deeply and genuinely happy, in a way that neither of them had thought possible that snowy Christmas Eve when they made their impulsive vows. "Do you ever regret it?" Franklin asked. "Choosing me over the life you could have had?" "Never," Daphne said firmly. "Not once. You gave me everything that matters. Love, partnership, freedom, family. What more could I possibly want?" Harrison Kincaid died in 1895, and in his will, he left his entire estate to Daphne. It was a fortune that would have made them wealthy beyond imagination. But Daphne surprised everyone by dividing it among various charities and community projects, keeping only a small portion to establish a trust fund for their children's education. "We do not need his money," she told Franklin. "We never did. Everything we have, we built ourselves. That is worth more than any inheritance." The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the turn of the century, Franklin was recognized as one of the best horsemen in Wyoming, and their quarter horses were known across the western states. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and honest dealing. Rose, their eldest, married a veterinarian and moved to Cheyenne but visited often. James took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, showing his father's gift with horses. The twins, inseparable as always, went east to college, though both swore they would return to Wyoming eventually. On Christmas Eve of 1903, exactly 20 years after their wedding, Franklin and Daphne stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the snow fall. The house was warm behind them, full of children and grandchildren celebrating the holiday. There was food and laughter and music, all the things they had worked so hard to create. 20 years, Daphne said softly. Can you believe it? Sometimes I still wake up and think it was all a dream. That I am going to open my eyes and find myself back in that leaking cabin with nothing but hope and stubbornness to my name. That cabin was enough. It was everything we needed to start. Franklin pulled her close. You were everything I needed. The cabin was just a building. You were the one who made it a home. We made it a home, Daphne corrected. Together. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new. Somewhere inside, Rose laughed at something her husband said, and James was teaching his young son to play checkers. The twins were arguing good-naturedly about something, the way they always did. Patricia, still strong at 63, was telling stories about her grandchildren's childhood escapades. I made the right choice, Daphne said suddenly. That night in the church when I asked you to marry me, it was the best decision I ever made. Even though it meant giving up everything you knew. I did not give up anything that mattered. I gained everything that did. She turned to face him, her face lined now but still beautiful to him, still the brave young woman who had chosen poverty with him over wealth without. You gave me the richest life, Franklin, not in money but in all the ways that count. Love and family and purpose and freedom, that is wealth that lasts. Franklin kissed her, soft and sweet, 20 years of love and partnership and shared hardship making it deeper than any first kiss could ever be. I love you, he said. I loved you when we had nothing and I love you now with all that we have built. That has never changed. And never will, Daphne said. Inside, someone called for them to come open presents. The grandchildren were getting restless, and Patricia was insisting on reading the Christmas story before the gift exchange. Franklin and Daphne smiled at each other, then walked back into the warmth and chaos of their full, rich life. The poorest cowboy had indeed given her the richest life. Not because he had become wealthy, though the ranch was successful by any measure, but because he had given her partnership, respect, love, and the freedom to be herself. Because he had worked beside her as an equal rather than ruling over her as a master. Because he had loved her not for what she brought him, but for who she was. And that, Daphne thought as she settled into her chair surrounded by children and grandchildren, was worth more than all the gold in California. Years continued to pass in the natural rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, children grew, and Franklin and Daphne grew old together with the contentment of people who had lived fully and loved well. They added more land, built cottages for James and his family, welcomed more grandchildren. The ranch became something of a local institution, known for quality horses and fair dealing. In 1910, when Daphne was 47 and Franklin 49, they stood at the dedication of the Garrett Community Center in Fort Laramie, funded by their donations. It was a place for education and gatherings, open to all regardless of wealth or status. Daphne insisted on a library, remembering the farmer's almanac they had borrowed so many years ago. This is what wealth should do, she told the gathered crowd. It should lift everyone up, not just those lucky enough to have it. Franklin stood beside her, proud and quiet, his hand finding hers as it always did. They were partners still, in every sense that mattered. In their later years, they spent more time on the porch, watching the ranch operate under James's capable management. Franklin taught his grandchildren to ride, passing on his knowledge and his patient way with horses. Daphne kept the books and wrote long letters to their scattered children and grandchildren, holding the family together with words and wisdom. When Franklin died in 1920 at the age of 61, suddenly and peacefully in his sleep, Daphne grieved deeply, but not with regret. They had been married for 37 years, and not one of those years had been wasted. She wore black for a month, then put it aside because Franklin would have wanted her to keep living, not mourning. She lived another 15 years, watching her grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. She saw the world change in ways she never could have imagined, saw automobiles replace horses and electricity come to the ranch. But through it all, she never forgot that Christmas Eve in 1883 when she made the choice that shaped her entire life. She told the story often to anyone who would listen, especially young women trapped by expectation and circumstance. "I chose the poorest cowboy," she would say, "and he gave me the richest life. Not because of what he had, but because of who he was. Never let anyone tell you that security is more important than happiness. Never let anyone choose your life for you." Daphne Garrett died in 1935 at the age of 72, surrounded by children and grandchildren, in the house she and Franklin had built with their own hands and hearts. Her last words were reported by Rose, who sat holding her mother's hand at the end. "Tell your children," Daphne whispered, "that love matters more than money. That courage matters more than comfort. That choosing your own path, even when it is hard, is better than walking someone else's easy road." They buried her next to Franklin on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple stone that read, "Daphne Kincaid Garrett, 1863 to 1935. She chose love and lived richly." The ranch continued on, passed down through generations of Garretts who carried forward the values Daphne and Franklin had built it on. Hard work, fair dealing, love of family, and the courage to choose your own path regardless of what others thought. And in Fort Laramie, the story of the rich girl who married the poor cowboy on Christmas Eve became legend, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the truth, preserved in letters and journals that Rose carefully maintained, was better than any legend. It was the story of two people who chose each other against all odds and all advice, who worked together to build something meaningful from nothing, who loved deeply and completely for nearly 4 decades, who proved that the richest life has nothing to do with money and everything to do with living according to your own values, with someone you love beside you. On Christmas Eve each year, the Garrett family gathered at the ranch, now run by Rose's grandson, and someone always raised a glass to Franklin and Daphne. To the courage of that long-ago choice and the life it made possible. To love over wealth, partnership over power, and choosing your own path over following someone else's. The ranch still stood, expanded and modernized, but fundamentally unchanged. The horses were still bred with care and trained with patience. The land was still worked by people who understood its value and respected its demands. And the story was still told, a reminder that sometimes the hardest choice is the right one, and that a life built on love will always be richer than one built on convenience or comfort. That Christmas Eve in 1883, when Daphne Kincaid chose the poorest cowboy, changed both their lives forever. Franklin Garrett gave her the richest life not through wealth accumulated, but through love shared, work honored, and freedom cherished. They built an empire not of money but of meaning, and that legacy lasted far beyond their years. In the end, Daphne's choice had proven her father wrong and her own instincts right. The poorest cowboy had indeed given her the richest life, and that richness was measured in love, family, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived on their own terms.